everyone, I hope you're well and that your weekend was good. I thought I'd do something a little bit different. I haven't really done this since 2020. I used to occasionally post like geomantic readings and things like that, and I Ching readings on the channel, and then I kind of stopped for a while. But I'm really interested in the global uncertainty that's happening right now, and I think the astrology, for whatever reason, is not really giving us the full picture. So I thought it might be interesting to just have a look at like do a little reading, like a divination, so that we can have a look at what else might be kind of going on. But I just thought I'd kind of lay out the astrology so that we can get a sort of a sense of the kind of I suppose the macro picture. So essentially this week we've got a couple of important transits happening. First of all, Venus and Mars, you know, they made their conjunction recently, and they are now approaching Pluto, all in Capricorn. And this will only happen the first week of March. But we still need to be aware of these energies, because both Venus and Mars, as they approach Pluto, are going to be making a sextile to Neptune this week. So this is on, I think, Wednesday and Thursday. And this is kind of interesting energy because, you know, Neptune can work in one of two ways. It can work as a sort of a dissolver or a kind of a softener of edges, and therefore sometimes also of boundaries. It can also sometimes cause a little bit of confusion, but equally it can make us more diffuse. We can think more in the right brain, so in a more intuitive way, and that can often lead to like finding solutions to problems that we might not otherwise. And if we consider that, you know, Mars by nature, certainly in traditional astrology, is considered to be a malefic, it's the planet of war, and we do have that you know, kind of peace talks and things happening at the moment between the US and Russia over Ukraine. You know, this might be relevant. So Mars and Venus coming together. Venus is the benefic, she's the lesser benefic. So in a way, hopefully softening Mars. She's all about peace and about diplomacy, that kind of thing. Mars is all about kind of war and imposing one's will. But we do have to bear in mind that they are approaching Pluto, and Pluto in and of itself can be a little bit of a, it can be a bit of a power monger and a plutocrat, and is not always upfront or kind of above board. So we just do need to bear that in mind. But Neptune in and of itself tends to be a little bit more altruistic. It's much more about selflessness, about compassion. So I'm hoping that these Neptune sextiles to Venus and Mars are going to soften things a little bit, and you know, allow for peace talks to flow. But we do also have to bear in mind, as I say, that when Neptune is negatively sort of affected or afflicted, it can sometimes lead to deceptiveness, or people being a little bit vague, and you know, sort of not necessarily lying, but sometimes deceiving by omission. So, you know, we do have to kind of bear that in mind. But, you know, fortunately, we are talking about a sextile aspect, which is usually quite positive. So I'm hoping that this is going to offset the other key transit this week, which is a Mercury square to Uranus. So Mercury currently in the sign of Aquarius, from where it is kind of making us think in terms of the group, in terms of altruism, sometimes also kind of fine-tuning our scientific and mathematical brain, you know, the more left brain. So that's interesting, given that we've got this very right brain energy happening here with Neptune. So Mercury in Aquarius, you know, this is an air sign, it's fixed air. It used to be ruled by Saturn, and it is associated with the kind of detachment that's sometimes necessary, you know, in order to sort of carry out scientific experiments, that kind of thing. So making an aspect to Uranus, which is the ruler of Aquarius. So that's kind of interesting. There's some interesting what do you call it, displacement going on there, or mutual reception. So Uranus in Taurus, currently at around about 11 degrees or so of Taurus. It's just come off of that sextile to Jupiter, which we had last Friday. That kind of turned out to be a bit of a weird one. You know, again, the sextile is supposed to be dynamic and stimulating, but we do need to bear in mind, and I think this is where, you know, I've kind of realize as an astrologer that sometimes you need to go back to first principles when it comes to astrology. And we do need to remember that we're not talking about natal astrology here. We're talking about mundane astrology, which tends to be purer than natal astrology. And natal astrology very often is conducted along sort of Jungian psychological lines, which tends to sort of see things in terms of like grays. So it tends to kind of sort of see everything as potentially like positive or negative. But in mundane astrology, which is truer to the old traditions out of which astrology emerged, Uranus is considered to be a malefic. It's associated with the sickle. It's associated with the guillotine of the French Revolution, so cutting off people's heads, severing, splitting. It also causes chaos. It tends to sort of make things break down into chaos, and that is the first stage often in a revolution, is you create chaos, you dismantle the old order, and then you need to have a sort of a secondary process whereby you restore a new order, in its place. And that isn't always necessarily done by Uranus. Sometimes you need other more constructive planets to help you with that process, such as Saturn. Now, this Mercury-Uranus square happens on Friday. So we first have the sextiles to Venus and Mars on, I think, Wednesday and Thursday, and then this is followed by the square on Friday. But of course, this will already be an orb. So we do need to just bear that in mind. And on top of that, the day before, Mercury is going to be making a positive aspect to Chiron in Aries, so another sextile. So that can be potentially quite healing. And as I say, Uranus is very unpredictable. So we may discover that the square turns out to be this fixed square between Mercury and Uranus turns out to be kind of a tension that leads to sort of that pushes us through to find solutions, and is more positive than the sextile to Jupiter, which is unusual because, as I say, like Uranus making a sextile to a benefic like Jupiter, you would kind of think would sort of all go well, that it would lead to breakthroughs and that kind of thing. So, as I say, a lot of unpredictable energy around at the moment, and that's why I thought it might be interesting to just do more of a divination, because it's a bit more free-flowing and it allows for more information to kind of come through. So I thought what I'd do is I would first of all get us a hexagram from the I Ching, because that can give us an overall theme for the week. And then I thought I'd clarify these planets with some of my geomancy cards, just for fun, and we'll see what comes out. Sometimes it's quite surprising actually, what comes out. So let's start with getting a hexagram, and then we will get the changing lines for that to see if we've got a second hexagram, and just look at those themes, and then we will move on to, as I say, some geomancy. And I often find that, the themes that come out are really quite thought-provoking and appropriate. So, yes, hopefully the Shen spirits and the elementals and the planetary intelligences will help to sort of guide us and give us a little bit more information. So let's see what we get. Okay, so interesting, we get hexagram 36, which as far as I remember is brightness hiding. We'll check that in a minute, but first of all I want to get some information about changing lines. So what I like to do is I like to use my pendulum just to ask whether there are any changing lines when I use the cards rather than the coins. So I've got a lovely piece of quartz on a copper chain, and I'd just like to ask, do we have any changing lines in this hexagram, yes or no, and then see what happens. So the answer is yes, we do. So only line 4. Right, so what does that give us? So let's just read hexagram 36. So I'm using the Kasha book, the total I Ching. Yes, it is brightness hiding. That's what I thought. Okay, so brightness hiding all the calling birds. So, in contrast to the rising sun, Ming Yi, which is what this is called, is the dark sun, the sun in the earth, and the sacrifice to the dark powers at the earth altar. So in other words, this is when the sun is below the horizon, and we often have this in winter, you know, when certainly in the astrological cosmology, the sun would be below the horizon in winter. It would kind of go into hibernation. And that's why in the Greek, you know, in the Greek traditions, Apollo would leave the Oracle of Delphi and Dionysus would take over. So this is similar to Dionysus, the dark sun. So it says this is about traveling through the demon country, traveling among the barbarians, outcasts, marginalized people, exiled away from the centers of culture and power. So this is really about very Uranian energy, actually, that sense of being an outcast or somehow different or kind of a misfit. So a central image is a solar eclipse. The eclipse at Feng that signaled King Wu's receipt of the mandate of heaven when he was in hiding in the mourning hut for his father, King Wen. So this is quite a famous story, actually. So King Wu, his father died, and he was supposed to go into the mourning hut for the prescribed mourning period, which is like, I don't know, quite a long time, like 3 months or something. And like as he did so, there was the solar eclipse, and it darkened the skies, and he could see the Big Dipper, which is a very important constellation in Chinese cosmology. It's considered to be sort of like the seat of the High Lord of Heaven. So he wanted to know if this was a sign that he should leave the hut and he should sort of wage war on his father's enemies. So he asked the diviners to cast a divination for him in I Ching. And essentially they told him to that King Wen had been imprisoned by the Shang tyrant, and so King Wu, his son, set his armies marching to overthrow the oppression, and essentially this was contravening the sort of the prescribed mourning period and that whole ritual. So it was kind of going against social convention, and in that sense, again, very Uranian, sort of doing what's unexpected or contrary to what's expected of you by society, and sort of the way that they interpreted it is they said that King Wu, although he appeared to be going against society, he was actually going with the sort of the will of heaven. So in that sense, he was actually not doing any wrong, and in that sense, it was right. It was almost sort of a mandate for him to break out and to do something unexpected. So it says this particular hexagram helps in hardship and accepting a difficult task. It evokes a series of heroes. Yes, so heroes from their sort of military past, China's military past. People who endured hardship, oppression, or who accepted a difficult task. So accepting the hardship implied in brightness hiding, symbolized by the calling bird, will bring about deliverance and the new day. So it's about hiding your light, protecting yourself, or accepting and beginning a difficult task. So it's about oppression and hidden influences, which I think is interesting given what we said about Pluto. That it does seem as though there are kind of these hidden influences going on. We're seeing a lot of kind of machinations behind the scenes with like central banks and governments doing strange things, almost, you know, to try and sort of like, it seems to be disrupting the natural order. It's certainly not, you know, like in terms of the astrology, things are not working the way that we expect them to. And, you know, a couple of astrologers, you know, have said this as well. And it's a little bit puzzling. And it could be, as I say, because there are kind of these hidden influences, these sort of plutocratic forces that are trying to kind of like upset the status quo or maintain the status quo through subterfuge. So we should bear that in mind. So it says, brightness hiding describes your situation in terms of entering the darkness to protect yourself. So basically going into hiding, like the sun below the earth, or to begin a difficult new endeavor. So one of the two. The way to deal with it is to hide your light, conceal your intelligence by voluntarily entering what is beneath you, like the sun as it sets in the evening. There is a real possibility of injury in the situation. By dimming the light of your awareness and entering the darkness, you can avoid being hurt. You have the chance to release yourself from your problems and inaugurate a new time. Putting your ideas to the trial by accepting drudgery and difficulty will bring you profit and insight. So that's really interesting. You know, as I say, given that we've got this square between Mercury and Uranus, and we do have Venus and Mars approaching Pluto, and some people have seen this as potentially like some kind of war or kind of power struggle. So let's see what the changing line says, because that can very often change the meaning somewhat and bring a certain degree of subtlety into the situation. So we've got 6 at the 4th, which is a dark bird calling, enter the left belly, catch the heart of the hidden brightness, issue forth from their gate and chambers. So it says, be intent on catching the heart. You find the heart of the darkness obscuring you. Get out of this terrible place. Take aggressive action. Go right to the heart of it and reclaim your lost intelligence. Leave the situation and don't come back. That's, wow, that's quite dramatic. So, I mean, it does seem to speak of this, reclaiming your intelligence is this Mercury, and as I say, Uranus can sometimes be about cutting or severing. So that seems to be what it's predominantly talking about here. So Kasha's interpretation is this begins a time of abundance. Don't be afraid to act alone. You are connected with a creative force. So that's really interesting. So it's kind of, it reminds me a lot of, you know, Heart of Darkness or Apocalypse Now, you know, that whole idea about war and the sort of the dark heart that's sort of at the root of mankind and our kind of tendency to sort of warmonger and I suppose the idea also of, you know, can anything ever positive come from conflict? I mean, here they do seem to be saying take aggressive action, which is quite Martian. So it says you find the heart of darkness obscuring you. So I mean, this could be Pluto. Get out of this terrible place. So leave, take aggressive action, go right to the heart of it and reclaim your lost intelligence. So it's interesting that Pluto and Mercury are, you know, close to each other here. Leave the situation and don't come back, which is very Uranian. And in fact, Uranus is the planet that's kind of ahead of all of these other planets because, you know, the planets are moving in this direction. That's super interesting. And what does it change into? Let's see. So it changes into 55, which is abundance, actually. Wow. So the situation flips itself on its head, which is incredible. Yes, abounding, receiving the mandate. So this is very much in line with what with the whole kind of King Wu thing. Yes, here we go. So we move from hexagram 36 to hexagram 55. So this is this complete flip, because hexagram 55 occurs at the summer solstice, so it's the time of maximum light, actually, and this is the time of kind of darkness and of winter, in a sense. So this is super interesting. So there's a complete inversion that happens. So if we go to hexagram 55, it's all about the cornucopia. So abounding suggests a hing or an image fixing ritual. This particular version of the hing ritual was celebrated at the height of summer, when the year changes at the solstice and the dark influx begins. So yes, right at the heart of summer. The king would withdraw into seclusion into the morning hut to magically fix the forms of coming abundance by sacrificing to the dark forces that bring the harvest. So that's what I was saying about King Wu going into the morning hut. The character also suggests playing the war tambours for the armies that will become active in autumn after the harvest ritual. It represents offerings that bring happiness, wine drinking feasts, and the wine vessel used at the outskirts altar, a great vessel full of abundance and blessings. Its root is pig, combining hidden riches and facing danger. And it also refers to King Wu's military capital on the Feng River, which refers to those events I was talking about of conquering the Shang, which had oppressed his father, King Wen. And it talks about that solar eclipse, which happened at about on the 20th of June, 1070 BCE, at the solstice, so very close to the solstice, actually. So this is super interesting. Yes, and so then he asked for the diviners to make a divination, and they told him to march, to set his armies marching. So in a shocking and radical action, he not only broke the prescribed mourning, but carried his father's corpse, which had not yet been enshrined in a spirit tablet, with him into battle to ensure the support of heaven. So that's what I was saying, is this act of obedience to the heavenly mandate, which broke all the rules on earth, turned out to be a blessing and it brought great abundance to all. So Karsh's interpretation is, it describes your situation in terms of abundance and fertile profusion to come. There is a fundamental change preparing. So that, I think, is very Uranian. The way to deal with it is to be exuberant and expansive, overflow with good feelings, support and generosity, give with both hands. This is pleasing to the spirits. Through it they will give you success, effective power, and the capacity to bring the situation to maturity. Imagine yourself as the king whose power bestows wealth and happiness on all. Rid yourself of sorrow, melancholy and care. Be like the sun at midday, which obviously, falls kind of directly overhead, and so the shadows are sort of even, or they disappear. Shed light on all and eliminate the shadows. That's so interesting. So I think we just need to bear that in mind, that this is a process. So we start with hexagram 36, we go to line 4, then from line 4 we go to hexagram 55. So this is a process of, first of all, going right to the heart of darkness. So this could be, as I say, to do with this Venus-Mars approaching conjunction to Pluto, that somehow we need to sort of identify like where the source of the rot, essentially, and then aggressively take back what we feel is ours, or what has been stolen in the situation. They talk about taking back your intelligence, so being able to see clearly again, to see things clearly as they are. And that's, as I say, what is puzzling astrologers at the moment, is that there seems to be something missing. There's something hidden that we can't see, and something's obscuring it. And I think they're saying, kind of keep asking questions until you get to the root of what the issue is, and that this will allow for the situation to then flip. So this is super interesting. I think let's now do some geomancy just to see what kind of comes out by clarifying here. So I'm going to use my new geomancy cards that I had printed in December. I just thought it would be fun, to give them a whirl, and let's see what we get. So I'm going to ask to clarify, first of all, these hexagrams. Interesting conjunction. And then 55. So there's a release of some kind. So we first of all, we get conjunctio, which is about, it's kind of a coming together. So it's like literally like a conjunction, an astrological conjunction. But it can also be about a union or a nexus point. So, I think it's interesting that they said go right into the belly of the beast almost. Get to the heart of something. So in other words, merge with it. Then like reclaim what is yours, and then leave. So that's really, really interesting. And it does also fit with this idea of an eclipse. A solar eclipse always happens at new moon, and you have a conjunction between the sun and the moon. So the moon obscures the face of the sun. So that also seems very appropriate. And then we move to Cauda Draconis, which is about endings and culmination points. So this is associated a lot with the South Node, and with kind of like a release of karmic, a karmic contract or something of that ilk. There's a kind of a release from a situation in where you feel bound. So, I mean, fascinating stuff. As I say, it does seem that once you do that, or once we do that as a collective, that we flip into really positive energy. And interesting too that both of these are ruled by the earth element. So again, that seems appropriate. So this is very kind of earth-based energy. Let's have a look now at the more cosmic energy. So I'm going to switch now to the elemental oracle, I think it's called. Okay. So Mars, we get music. Venus, we get fecundity. Pluto, we get passion. Gosh, these are all very appropriate. Mercury, we get endurance. Neptune, wow, look at that, fluidity. And for Uranus, we get growth, plants. So interesting that Uranus is in Taurus, which is all about kind of growth and plants and farming and that kind of thing, the fecundity of the earth. So I mean, this is super interesting. Let's just start over here with Neptune. So we've got Neptune. I mean, with Mars. So Mars is a number 28. So that breaks down to a 1, and I mean, interesting imagery here. So this is about joy in music, and I find it fascinating if we consider that, you know, Mars is applying to a sextile to Neptune, and the combination of the two does often lead to sort of dancing, you know, like lyrical movement. Neptune's very much associated with lyrical forms of arts such as music, film, photography, that kind of thing. And then Mars is, of course, is about the physical body. So it's interesting that we've got this combination occurring, where they are asking us to move our bodies to music, to sort of, and very often that does bring a sense of joy, actually, that physical movement, that sort of rhythmic movement. So that's very interesting, and a nice positive spin on Mars here. And then next we've got Venus. So again, very interesting, given that Venus is in Capricorn, which is an earth sign. Fecundity or rain. And as I've said before, this image always reminds me of the Empress. So we've got 35, which breaks down to an 8. So that is about transformation. And we have the seed, the seedling that has been planted in the woman's womb and is slowly growing into something. So it may be on some level that this Venus Mars conjunction has kind of seeded something, and that it will start to grow as it makes aspects to Neptune, which can bring about inspiration. And it's interesting that we've got a lot of rain here. This is all about rain, actually. So it's the water that is kind of coming down onto the earth, which is making this fertility and this fecundity possible. So again, interesting, you know, I think it is definitely pointing to a link here to the sextile to Neptune. And then this is beautiful. So for Pluto, we get passion. It's number 14. It breaks down to a 5. And that's all about change. So this is about the soul, or about passion. And I mean, that is very much the positive side of Pluto, is kind of getting in touch with your passions, understanding what your soul, like the truth of your soul. So seeing through the eyes of your soul, seeing things as they are from as an elevated perspective, from a spiritual perspective. And as a result of that, moving kind of towards what's kind of meant for you, or what you are here to do, what you feel kind of passionate about. And then moving to Mercury, we've got endurance, or the rock. So this is 20, breaks down to a 2. And I mean, this is an interesting one, this idea of endurance. So we did get the sense with the I Ching of a need to endure through difficult or dark times, oppressive times. And as I say, it does feel, we do feel as though we are currently in a time of strange uncertainty and anxiety. And we've got this image of a tree that's kind of clinging to a rock in very hostile environment. And I think it's talking here about, perhaps the need to, in order to sort of survive, or to cope in difficult situations, sometimes we need to engage that more logical side of us that's going to be strategic, and that's going to plan or see or kind of talk your way out of something difficult. And also, I think it's interesting that you've got this incongruence happening here between the tree, which shouldn't be on a kind of a rock on the top of a mountain. So there's something here too about feeling like an outsider or a misfit, or something, to do with the square, that I think plays into this energy of kind of riding out the storm, or doing what's necessary. Sometimes that means emotionally detaching a little bit, just in order to kind of cope, to get through the situation, and to sort of come out the other side. But interesting that that in both of these images we've got plants and sort of growth happening, in terms of like Uranus and Mercury. And then here we've got, for Neptune, we've got fluidity. So this is a number 12, breaks down to a 3, so similar to the Empress kind of energy. And I mean, this reminds me of that famous painting of kind of the birth of Venus, where she kind of comes out of the ocean, like from a shell. And interesting that they're talking about fluidity. So this is like the outer core of the earth, but they're showing an image of the oceans. And I suppose, the oceans are the kind of fluid, like covering of most of the earth's surface. And one of the things about Neptune that I think is really positive is this ability to be adaptable or fluid in sort of difficult situations, to be able to kind of maneuver and like not offer resistance, because sometimes, you know, if you do resist to like openly, especially if you're not certain about what's kind of happening, you just draw attention to yourself, you know, and you kind of open yourself up to being victimized by people who, you know, who may be nefarious. So I think it's kind of talking here about this need to be fluid and adaptable and kind of go with the flow. So the beginning of that hexagram 36, which is all about kind of brightness hiding, so concealing your intelligence initially, in order to find safety, to sort of steal away, to creep away from your enemies, or from people who want to oppress you, or somehow kind of do you ill, kind of thing. So that may be important when we get to these sextiles. But I think, you know, if we combine the energies, if we combine outer core fluidity with rain, and we combine it with music, this is a lot about kind of flow and joy and going with the flow, being fluid, opening up, I think, you know, quite right-brained, quite joyful, and a sort of a need to allow things to sort of unfold naturally, is what I'm kind of getting. And this combination, I think, of kind of water and earth, I think is quite fertile. So it could be that you get a lot of inspiration during this time, you know, for kind of projects, or that kind of thing, or kind of art, etc. And then finally with Uranus we get plants, so growth or plants. I mean, interesting image. It reminds me actually of a card that we get in the Animal Spirit deck by Kim Krans, the elk. And the elk is all about sort of being a kind of like an elder in society, so being a leader, somebody who's got a strong back and who can kind of like carry the load for others, for many others. It reminds me also of some of the fixed star aspects that we had at the full moon, the Leo full moon. So you might want to go back and watch my video there, because I think there's something in that about being a kind of a rock for others, or starting new projects, laying foundations for kind of long-term initiatives, for a legacy. So that might be important here. But of course, if we pair it with Uranus, and this idea of Uranus being in Taurus, which is, as I say, associated with things like farming, banking, the natural world, that kind of thing, and finance too, that it could also be talking about finding unusual ways to grow your savings. You know, there's a lot of kind of talk right now about CBDCs, so central bank digital currencies, and how this could be used to control people. And so a lot of people are seeing this as like positive justification for moving into cryptocurrencies, like more independent ones, you know, like Bitcoin. And, you know, it may be a good time to sort of look into that now. That may be one way to sort of work with this energy to sort of grow. But it could also be growth through, you know, what we saw in the I Ching, you know, this abundance that we see in Hexagram 55, of kind of growth through listening to your kind of inner calling, your soul's like whisperings, and the mandate of heaven, rather than like earthly leaders who may not necessarily like have, you know, everyone's best interests at heart, and may only be kind of catering to the few rather than the many. Because there's definitely an element here with the I Ching of not following social conventions, of following the mandate of heaven and not the rules of earth. And that fits very nicely with Uranus, which, as I say, is about the revolutionary. So I mean, that's really, really interesting. I mean, I'd like to just get some final cards just to sort of end off the reading. So let's just pull three Geomancy cards to kind of ask for some advice. So, right, that's the bottom. Now from the top. Interesting. Conjuncture again. Rubaeus and Corsair. Interesting figures. So, interesting that conjunctio again is echoing this conjunctio here of hexagram 36. So somehow a kind of an alliance or a nexus point or a coming together of like, I don't know, dark and light, or moving closer into something allows us to sort of like merge with that thing. And then with Rubeus here, I mean, this is very much the card associated for me with like that Pluto, that Scorpio energy. It is Mars in Scorpio, but this is of course the traditional system which predates the modern planets. So you could take it as being like Pluto sort of like, which is all about passion, anger, vice, obsession, power, and danger. So it seems as though you've got to kind of merge with the danger somehow, not necessarily physically. But I think it's talking about like psychologically, almost like a shaman, shape-shifting, so that you kind of get close to that heart of darkness to see what it is, in that sense merging with it, and in order to understand it. And then from there you pull away with Carse. Carse is Saturn in Capricorn, which is where Pluto, Venus and Mars currently are, which is about limits, boundaries, isolation, locks, borders and bonds. So I think it's about loosening those bonds, you know, like we had with hexagram 36. So it's telling you to kind of go right into the heart of darkness, take back what is yours, and then pull right away, like cut off ties. So you know, in that sense, boundaries being important, that you almost sort of lock yourself away like a panic room, a safe haven, so that you are like safe from attack. So that's, I mean, really, really interesting, quite dramatic energies. But I would urge you to go and sort of do your own research into the hexagrams, because often so much information kind of comes from studying those changing lines and the different interpretations of the hexagrams by various people like Richard Wilhelm and so on, until you kind of emerge at a meaning that's particular to you and that is kind of interest to you. I mean, one thing I am interested in is to see where it is in the human design. So let's look at that quickly before we end the reading. Hi guys, so I've done two outlines of the hexagrams that we got during our divination today, and what's so fascinating is when you put them into the human design mandala, they actually flank the zodiac sign of Pisces, which is what we're currently in. The sun is currently going through Pisces in terms of the western zodiac, so the tropical zodiac. So what this means is that in terms of Richard Rudd's gene keys system, that these two would be programming partners, so that may be important. But as far as gate 36 is concerned, it's located in the emotional center, so it's that center that we associate with the lunar cycles, and seems to be very strongly emphasized at the moment through the lunar phases, the particular degrees that the sun and the moon are traversing at the moment. We seem to be getting it a lot. So the gate 36 in the emotional center is part of the collective sensing circuitry. It's the channel of versatility, which I think links up to the throat, if I'm not mistaken. It's this channel here, 36, kind of going up, I think, to 35. And basically it's about crisis and resolution on a collective level. So it's about the movement from turbulence to cooperation to compassion. And this is how Richard Rudd describes it in terms of his, you know, moving up through the different vibrational levels of the same hexagram, if you like, the same gate. So he says, you know, in his gene keys, in its lowest form, crisis is debilitating and discouraging. In its highest form, it provides inner brightness and outer gentility, which come together to live through every aspect of human experiencing. Once an experience is indulged, feelings flow through a full range of emotional highs and lows. So this is that cycling through the emotional wave, riding the emotional wave right through to the end. So experiencing is subjective and ultimately impersonal. So isn't that interesting? Subjective but ultimately impersonal. So line 4 is about 25 to 26.5 degrees of Pisces, and you know, you might want to check that in case you've got synastry with your natal chart. And this specific line is about following your instincts or your intuition. So, you know, what we heard from Karsha about kind of merging with the darkness in order to, first of all, conceal yourself, but also to see with the, like, to see in the dark, to see with your other eyes, your third eye. So Richard Rudd describes it in terms of surveying, and Chetan Parkin says it's about accessing your way through following your own light or inner guidance, through all situations, especially during times of crisis. So it's really about that kind of instinct that kicks in, that people talk about often when they are in life-threatening situations or in like extreme environments and caught in like natural disasters, and they suddenly just say that there's this intelligence that kind of overcomes them, and they just know that they've got to do X or Y in order to like survive or get out of the way of something or whatever. And I think it's talking about this. So I mean, it's so interesting that we do feel as though we're in a time of crisis emotionally, and whether it's a case of sort of just sitting with that emotion and allowing it to the wave to crash and to kind of go on, or whether it is about listening to whatever your guidance tells you to do in terms of taking action or moving in the outside world, I think will depend on like everyone's individual circumstances as to what intelligence or information they get at that moment. But it does seem very relevant, as I say. It resonates with me on a strong level emotionally in terms of how people are experiencing the current time. So I think it's really quite fascinating. And then if we move to hexagram 55, which is what the hexagram changes into, so this is gate 55 in the emotional center as well. This is towards the beginning of Pisces, and they talk about the center as being about the individual channel of emoting, so it's part of the channel of emoting. And we can see down here it links the emotional center to the root center with hexagram 39, I think, if I'm not mistaken, gate 39. And this is all about moving from victimhood to freedom. So it's a kind of, it's learning to view your situation from a different perspective. So freeing yourself in terms of, if you're in an oppressive or difficult situation, it's all about kind of reframing so that you see the situation from the point of view of, well, why am I experiencing this? What am I learning? Etc., etc. So Richard Wright says, sometimes dramatic waves of spirit and emotions move through you without any rational rhyme or reason. An emotional trigger to realization. Creativity involves knowing both melancholy and bliss. So it's about kind of understanding both sides of the spectrum of emotion, because it's often only when we know the one that we can recognize the other in terms of through contrast, And I think that's what he's kind of getting at here, is that sometimes we do end up in difficult situations, and sometimes what that does is it allows us to really realize how lucky we are, and also to experience gratitude when we are in the opposite situation. So it's located in the first phase of Pisces and is all about relating to others through positive altruistic emotions, good feeling, a desire to share, being magnanimous and abundant. And it's about kind of creating abundance, and that's that cornucopia that we saw in the hexagram for yourself and for others. So it's about the sense of like win-win. So as we cooperate and we collaborate, so we all kind of benefit. So I think that's quite beautiful, actually, and it's a really nice way to sort of end off the reading. I mean, we did have a lot of positivity in the elemental oracles, and I think that's one way to view it, is that everything in its right context is appropriate, and sometimes we need every step along the way in order to sort of have a complete experience, or to sort of get from from A to B, so to ride that emotional wave through from kind of calm to crisis back to calm again. Yeah, so I hope that's been helpful, and let me know if you'd like more of these, and yes, I hope you have a great week, and see you again soon.